Well, Michelle, Kay and I are so excited to have you on today. I know we were chatting for many minutes before we jumped in, but I am so fascinated to actually learn more about your story. I understand you lost about 100 pounds before you went to college. And although a lot of people might think that's one of the most amazing things you've done, now as like registered dietitian and certified functional nutritionist and practitioner, you actually don't recommend losing the weight the way you did it, at least at the time. Can you share more about your process and how it really impacted your body at the time?
Thank you, by the way. First of all, I'm so excited to be here. I'm really excited to sit down with both of you. Yeah, my story is usually like as dietitians and practitioners, we kind of work as we lived, right? We usually work with the same conditions that we lived with. And really, my story is a telltale of what not to do, essentially. So I grew up in Queens, New York, which was an amazingly diverse place. I had always occupied a larger body. And then I knew when I was going away to the University of Delaware that people were going to judge me differently for my body size versus in Queens. I was like class clown in my high school of 5,000 students, reigning achievement of my life. That's my biggest achievement ever. And then really when I was going to school, I was thinking people are going to judge me for what I look like. I won't have the friends built in that I've had from childhood. People are going to be, it's a much more homogenous place, Delaware. So I wanted to go to the University of Delaware having lost weight. So I went on a very rapid weight loss journey and lost about 100 pounds in like a 3 to 4 month time frame, which is like I'm issuing a massive trigger warning. I would never recommend a client do this, but I'm just that type of person where when I say I'm going to do something, unfortunately, I'll do it, even if it harms me or doesn't. So I went to school and was so socially received differently than I had been with strangers before. And from a social perspective, losing weight is quite validating in society. From a physical perspective, I experienced tremendous illness, honestly, during my entire time in college. And I was going to doctors. I had panic attacks, thyroid issues, acid reflux, gut issues, a list of issues. And doctors were like, we have no idea what's wrong with you. Some of them even said, you could lose 5 more pounds. Congrats on your weight loss. What I came to realize was that rapid weight loss caused this like huge lack of homeostasis within my body and a huge lack of safety within my body that then resulted in like popping up all these different conditions, diseases, everything was happening. So my goal with clients is to really, if they want to lose weight, do it in a way that's really safe and then do it in a way that really regulates your nervous system all along the way, making sure you're not toxin overloaded, making sure that your body isn't scared from the weight loss that you lose, which can be really damaging. It took me many years to get my health back after that. So I would not recommend doing it that way to any of my clients or anyone listening.
Well, you mentioned that your doctor even said you could probably like maybe lose some more weight or something, which is, I think, a story that a lot of people hear when they go to the doctor if they complain of symptoms. Sometimes they're told you just need to eat less, exercise more, or you just need to lose weight, which is very common. What do you think it was about the way that you were doing it specifically that led to the symptoms you were experiencing? Because you said you had acid reflux, you had gut issues. I've heard you talk about how you had nutrient deficiencies before. What were you doing during that time period?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just have to mention the doctor piece because you brought up such an astute observation. And I think that while doctors, many of them are extremely well-meaning and very knowledgeable, when it comes to chronic illness that seems more mysterious or misunderstood, there's not that many tools in the toolbox that they have, which is why I think it's so valuable to have other types of coaches and people who actually sit with people. So I know that this is a controversial opinion, but I actually think that there's some cases where nutrition professionals are more helpful than doctors, not in getting medical diagnoses, medication, or anything that's within doctors' scopes, but that probably would have been the place where I would have gone to a dietitian, to be honest with you. And they would have been like, hey, you're starving to death. You're eating, 300 calories a day some days. Trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning. But, I think that someone would have picked up on it if they had looked at what I was eating and looked at what was going on. So what I did to lose weight was really just a severe calorie restriction and a vegan diet. And what I think caused me to have such rapid illness was not only this anxiety piece from, oh my gosh, we have low blood sugar and low nutrient levels, but I had a really long-term vegan diet. And one of the missing components of my diet was really protein and a lot of the nutrients that I believe your liver needs in order to detoxify. So when you are losing weight, your fat cells are releasing toxins pretty rapidly. And then your liver needs to be able to get rid of those, repackage those toxins and get them out of your body and drain them from the body. And if you don't have proper nutrients built up before you start a weight loss journey, you can actually get a buildup in those toxins, which can then cause a lot of other weird little stuff popping up within your body. And it might look like hypothyroidism, or it might look like other autoimmune diseases, but at its base, it's really just a high toxin load, very low nutrient level, and a lot of scarcity and non-safety within the body.
And I'm so curious, Michelle, on your journey, you lost all this weight. You said, you're going to college. People are receiving you well. You're feeling, I know you weren't feeling good at the time, but socially and outwardly, everyone thinks you look great. What was a moment in your life where you realized, like, the way I've done everything is completely wrong? Was it a coach you had or a nutritionist? Like, what was that turning point for you to realize, shit, everything I've done was not done in the right way?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's so interesting. So I have a cousin who has lupus, and this cousin who has lupus basically had debilitating pain throughout her body for years and never said anything about it, as women do. Really had all this pain in her body, and then she never went to a doctor for it. And then she lost 2 strands of hair, and she was she had a little bald spot, and she was like, I'm going to a doctor immediately. We only end up seeking care when it's something that starts to really bother us or it starts to affect us, even aesthetically. For myself, the panic attacks were just so severe that I was vomiting from them. I started to lose sight of my soul and my personality, where I'm an extremely extroverted person. I love having people around me, and I saw myself isolating, and my world was getting so small that I eventually said, I need to do something. So what I ended up doing was making this what I called my first battle plan for myself, because I was like, what can I do right now? The internet's not really a thing that much. I'm like, how do I get as much information as possible? How do I help anxiety? Oh, there's something about B12. Oh, there's something about grounding, all this other information. And I put it all into place, and I got what I would say is about 60% better. And then I ended up seeking the help of a naturopathic physician who's a very dear friend of mine now, Dr. Robert Kochko. And we kind of went through a Dutch test, and he was able to show me on paper, here's what's going on inside of your body. And I didn't have that experience before. So to me, it was just mysterious, get over it kind of symptoms. But until I could see in my labs what was going on inside, that's where I think naturopathic and functional medicine really saved my life, because I couldn't believe it that the weight loss and the stress and all of these things actually caused the anxiety. Because I was like, it seems unrelated. It can't be related. Weight loss is good.
Oh my gosh, I can relate to your story so much about anxiety. I actually went on a pretty restrictive diet about maybe 10, 12 years ago. And that was the first time that I experienced a panic attack and anxiety in my life. And I just remember thinking, gosh, where did this come from? I'm eating cleaner than ever. I'm doing all the right things. I'm paleo. I'm low carb. I'm exercising. I'm intermittent fasting. And all of a sudden now I just get these really horrific sort of anxiety attacks. And I remember a story that you shared on your Instagram about a guy who actually pointed out that maybe you have a panic disorder, which kind of changed your life. So I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit more. How do you work with your clients on anxiety and panic? And what's the blood sugar connection?
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that too, Kay. I didn't know that about you. So I'm happy to learn about you. And I'm sorry you had that experience also. It's not that uncommon of an experience when it comes to women specifically. Women's bodies are very pressed for survival. Men's bodies are, of course, too. But our bodies are really pressed for survival and really wired for survival. And what I mean by that is we're more dependent and reactive from a cortisol perspective. Now, I know we've all heard about the stress hormone, cortisol, so many times. Cortisol does basically 2 functions that we'll talk about here, which is that one, it's our rising hormone. It's the hormone that wakes us up in the morning. It also can help us with fat storage. And I guess the other function I would mostly talk about is it can help us to get sugar from inside of our body when we don't have any. So what ends up happening is if we have really low blood sugar, which can happen when women intermittent fast, when women eat a continuous low carb diet, is that our blood sugar can drop. And as a result, our body goes, where are we going to get sugar from? And it calls its friend cortisol in, and then cortisol will go up, and then your blood sugar will go up. So you can experience low blood sugar as anxiety. And I really think of anxiety as being this alarm system for our body. I really think of it's our body telling us, please help me with something, whether it's a nutrient deficiency, inflammation, could be something emotional, of course, as well. But I think of anxiety as being very physiological, and chronically low blood sugar that can come from intermittent fasting or a very low carb diet can lead to high cortisol and high anxiety.
I want to send this podcast to everyone in my family. So I might be putting my mom on blast right now, but we had a very packed weekend. We had a cousin's wedding, and I'm always thinking about her because she thinks she has anxiety. A lot of people associate themselves with like, I just am an anxious person. But from the outside, I'm looking at her and she's just not eating those meals. And I don't think she's purposefully intermittent fasting, but her body is going through exactly what you said. So I just wanted to highlight that because I've noticed a difference in her when she's eating, 3 blood sugar balancing meals a day. It truly makes a difference. So I'm actually curious on that point. A lot of people, I've heard you talk about this also on your Instagram and other podcasts, like people think like, oh, they're just an anxious person. Like that's just who I am. And I know you think otherwise. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that and give someone listening, a bit of hope who might be going through it.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm a New York Jew. If there's an anxious prototype of a person, it is me. Okay. It is my family. We're all walking Larry Davids. That's my entire family. Many of my family members are stand-up comedians. I mean, we are those people. We're like the neurotic, anxious Jewish people. That's us. And I still wouldn't consider myself an anxious person, despite the fact that I've experienced anxiety a lot. Anxiety is, again, like anything else, it is a communication system for our body. What people find really hard about that is that the communication between our body and brain can be broken even since childhood. So it's the first time that we say, don't feel that way. That could be the first anxiety we feel, or the first time that we have something physical going on with us. That could be the first anxiety we feel. But anxiety is a culmination of different factors that lead to either us oftentimes trying to ignore an emotion. That's when anxiety comes up, or not clearly understanding what's going on in our body. So I try to separate people's identity from their anxiety and view anxiety really as a symptom and as an experience, as opposed to an independent diagnosis. Now I'm aware it is quite literally known as, generalized anxiety disorder is a diagnosis. I think it can be viewed as, let's call it additionally, a set of symptoms. And knowing that it's a diagnosis tells you very little about where it's coming from. So I think if we de-identify with anxiety and make it an experience we're having or a symptom we're having, we actually get a little bit more power over it too.
I love that. Something that you've coined that I've identified myself as is a highly sensitive body. So can you explain what is a highly sensitive body and what causes a highly sensitive body?
Yeah. So this is really a term that actually I have to give full credit to Olivia Amatrano, who's Organic Olivia, on Instagram, because we were talking about histamines in her episode of her podcast that's coming out soon too. And I didn't realize she even coined it. I'm like, I have to give you trademarking rights for this. Like she totally got this. I really think of a person in a highly sensitive body. I consider myself a highly sensitive person also, Kaya, for sure. As someone whose body acts in a way that's either feels like they're almost allergic to stress, where they'll get physical symptoms from stress very quickly, and those can look like digestive symptoms. They're the type of person who, again, you can become more highly sensitive over time, or you can just be born kind of highly sensitive and then it progresses. But a person who will do like a mold detox protocol and feel like 100 times worse, and their symptoms will get worse. They'll go and have like oranges and all these healthy foods, fermented foods, and they'll feel super sick from those foods. They're the person whose body reacts stronger to things and also reacts differently to things. So it's really interesting, Kaya, because over the years I've worked with, when I first became a functional dietitian, let's call it, I became a dietitian 10 years ago. Maybe I started being a functional dietitian 7 or 8 years ago. And at that point, I was like, all the people who conventional medicine failed them started coming to me. Then over the years, what's been happening is all the people who kind of functional medicine failed them are now coming to me. And it's really become this like new kind of group of people who are not only not responsive to all this functional medicine stuff, but they feel worse when they do functional medicine stuff. Forget about the conventional stuff. They did that 10 years ago and it didn't work for them. Now they've also gone through functional medicine and it doesn't work. So it's really this group of people who, some of them may have a combination of these different conditions called mast cell activation syndrome, POTS, or hypermobility, or they're not diagnosed with those conditions, but they know that their body acts in a way that is just like out of alignment with the environment. And they almost feel like their body's betraying them because you're like, I don't understand what you're trying to tell me. Why are you not letting me go do things I want to do? But it's really just this body that's sensitized to the environment and is overreacting in some ways. And we have to find out why the body's doing that.
That's so fascinating. I can definitely speak to that experience of people who have gone through the functional medicine route. I've been working in functional medicine for, I think 13 years of my life at this point. and thought I was doing all the right things, going on the elimination diets, going on the anti-candida diet, doing this, doing that, and then ended up, significantly underweight to the point where I just did not look well and not sleeping well and all of that. And you think you're doing everything right, but actually you end up feeling worse. And what that causes is someone to feel like they are the issue, right? Like they feel shame around their body. So I love the work that you're doing where you're coining these new terms and bringing a different set of tools to these people. It's really exciting.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And also, again, you are really not alone in that experience. And some people, like you said, are getting sicker in ways of losing weight that they weren't intending to lose, getting nutrient deprived. And then quite literally, Kaya, there are people who take like a vitamin C supplement and they're in a flare for 3 days. And then their functional medicine doctor's like, oh, it's a Herx reaction. Stick with it. And it's like, no, they're just getting sicker. It's not a Herx reaction. So if ever people are in that situation where you feel like you're continuing to get sicker, you have to listen to yourself. Like if something doesn't feel right, it could really not be feeling right. And it could actually not be working for you. When I see functional medicine doctors and functional dietitians, and I love my functional medicine doctors and my dietitians, but when I see them putting in those one size fits all protocols, to me, I'm like, that's conventional medicine. If you give someone a candida protocol or you give them a supplement protocol, that is the same exact thing as Western medicine. Functional medicine is about understanding how every single organ in our body, every single cell in our body communicates with each other and is whole. That has nothing to do with taking random supplements. So I think that also functional medicine has really been bastardized to, like you said, have people ignore themselves and just do what another practitioner is telling them to do.
How can we start to unwind this, right? Because I think a lot of people end up on really restrictive diets to the point where they're scared of food. I know that I've definitely been there in the past. It took me time to unwind it. My mom is now currently going through that with her journey of acid reflux, and she is developing we're working on it, but she's developing like a sort of orthorexia here where it's like there's so much fear around food, which can then cause more harm than good. So how do you work with people to start to unwind that?
The sweet spot of the work that I love to do is how do we bridge the worlds between maintaining a healthy relationship with food and moving forward with functional nutrition interventions and any health goals we want. Because I'm sure you've both seen in the nutrition space right now, it's kind of like you're doing body positivity or you're doing functional nutrition, and you can't have it both ways. It's either one or the other, basically. I think the most important thing is that if you are on a short-term elimination diet, and I mean short-term, like 2 to 4 weeks at most, while you're doing it, it sounds so corny, but you're almost like, this food makes me feel weird now, but it's not actually bad. I would be having people like literally communicate with themselves. And the word I would keep using is, this is temporary. This is temporary. This is for right now. The goal of elimination diet is always to reintroduce the foods. That is often missed very much too. And I love working with reflux, by the way. So if you want, I can speak to reflux even specifically. If you think of reflux, even from an Eastern medicine perspective, there's like a heat issue, right? There's like a heat displacement issue. And in the functional medicine world, we view a lot of reflux as like low stomach acid, which is like this big new thing that everything is low stomach acid. When in reality, if you start giving yourself acid pills and betaine HCl, the fire is still burning too hot there, essentially. So it's really confusing. And when it comes to reflux, you kind of want to take the foods out that are like maybe spicier foods, higher fat foods, to not irritate the gut, but it doesn't do anything to heal the gut. There's nothing about taking those foods out that heals the actual issue underneath. So elimination diets are not root cause. They have to be temporary. And I think you just have to mind your nervous system the whole way through. I'll play games with myself even where sometimes I'm like, Michelle, let's try a low carb diet. And then I'll start waking up at 3 a.m. because of my cortisol's high. And I'm like, nice try, girlfriend. That didn't work at all. Or I'll start trying something. I'm like, oh, I'd love to lose 5 pounds, right? And then within 2 days, I'm restricting food. And I'm like, you have to be mindful of the language with yourself. And I think that's what I want everyone to do is like, oh, I'm afraid of spicy foods that I've eaten my entire life now. I need to address that. And I think it's just really about opening up kind of that internal conversation and the different voices that we have and seeing what's coming up. And then when you're in front of a meal wondering, like, is this making me feel nervous? Like, this should not be making me feel nervous. How do I address this and feel safer?
I love how you talk about you mentioning like minding your nervous system. I think that connection we don't think enough about. So maybe, I know you highlighted a few examples just recently, but maybe you can kind of explain what that is and why that's so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think when we also, this is like such a clickbait term, the nervous system now, and I feel like everyone's like not getting it. But I think so. Thank you for asking that question, because I feel like everyone's just saying
I hear it all the time. I'm like, okay, how do you define it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think of the nervous system as obviously the connection of communication between our body and our nerves, right? So when we think about the nervous system, we think of the two legs of the nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is our rest and digest state. So the state in which our body can do like cellular cleanup, it can properly digest things. And then we think of our sympathetic nervous system as more that fight, flight, freeze state, which is where many of us live, which is more in sympathetic dominance. What I think people don't realize about our nervous system is that it controls blood flow, it controls where nutrients go, it's the command center that communicates with the rest of the body, where nutrients are. Everything is commanded through the nervous system, how our body functions, what hormones are released, neurotransmitters released. So I think that what people think is going to be helpful for the nervous system is doing like cold plunging, or like, it's really just about asking yourself, I think often, like, what are my boundaries and what makes me feel safe? And I think safety will put you into parasympathetic dominance more than like doing weird biohacky stuff. I think the nervous system is really just seeking to feel heard and safe. So any activity that makes you feel that way is amazing. And of course, like singing and humming and doing other things like that are very vocal and expressive and vibrate that vagus nerve are really supportive. And there's like, again, fun little hacks for the vagus nerve. But then at its core, it's really like, what is making me feel unsafe and how can I make myself feel more safe, and opening up that conversation so that your nervous system responds within the safety limits and can express to you what those limits are.
I love that question. I don't think a lot of people ask themselves that often enough, like, what makes me feel safe? And there's such a mismatch, I feel, from, the women that we talk to, of women not feeling safe in their bodies, like not feeling safe with the food that they're eating or the choices that they're making, or relying on somebody else to tell them what their body needs. And I know I experienced this quite a bit, especially when I was practicing time restricted eating and intermittent fasting. So let's talk about this, because this is something that I think a lot of people want to talk about. They want to hear from you. Should menstruating women be practicing intermittent fasting?
I never recommend long-term intermittent fasting for menstruating women. And the reason for that is our hormones are very responsive and volatile during menstruation years. And also, like we talked about before, if our blood sugar continues to drop or our body perceives any source of unsafety or starvation, our cortisol is going to shoot up. Cortisol blocks the conversion of our thyroid hormones. Cortisol can block the production of our sex hormones. Cortisol also is very pro-insulinogenic. So if you have blood sugar issues, intermittent fasting can actually make blood sugar issues worse. And this can be kind of this vicious cycle. I just also feel like women's bodies, because we're so primed for survival, anything that signals starvation to us is probably not going to be fruitful for us in the long term. So intermittent fasting is and I'm really talking about 16/8 intermittent fasting. I caught some heat on Drew Pruitt's, the other member of this trio's Instagram for this, because people were saying, what about 12 and 12 intermittent fasting? I'm really thinking of the amount of time it would take for autophagy to happen. I'm really talking about 16/8 fasting when I say this. Most people do eat on a 12-12 schedule, where that's just like when they eat breakfast anyway. I'm more talking about prolonged intermittent fasts. Again, for women's bodies, even autoimmunity is so much drastically higher in women. And I really believe that it comes down to just not feeling safe. And then the communication channels of our body change as a result. Some stress is very productive in our body, and a lot of stress is very counterproductive in our body. Intermittent fasting is a good stress in people who are not stressed. I just don't know that many women who are not physiologically and mentally stressed. I haven't met them yet. If you meet them, let me know. It's not my type of women that I talk to all the time, for sure.
You're looking at one.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh my gosh, I was cracking up. I mean, no shade to that person. They were, I'm sure, just thinking they were pointing out something useful. But when they said, oh, well, you could fast 12 hours overnight, and you said, that's just sleeping.
Yeah, it's not. This is such an interesting thing. Just like a comment about the online space too. I've been saying the same things, so much so that some of my posts I've actually reposted from 6 years ago, because I have not really changed. I've changed my knowledge base and the people I'm treating and all this amazing stuff, but those foundations of nutrition that are so tried and true, those things don't change. So I've been talking about cortisol and the blood sugar connection since 2015. So I used to make the same posts and I wouldn't catch heat. I think people have become much more polarized on the online space, where this was not a controversial take. I did not think it was a controversial take. All of my colleagues, so many of my colleagues, not all, but so many of my colleagues are like the top specialists in women's fertility. You both work in the women's fertility and cycling space as well. And none of them would ever let their clients do intermittent fasting in the long term, because they'll watch what happens on a Dutch test when their clients' hormones change. And my friends, my colleagues, I'm so proud to say, are the people that women will go to when they've been diagnosed as infertile for 3 years. I mean, those are the people that they go to. And I can tell you that they will not let their clients intermittent fast, because they see such a drastic alteration in their fertility as well.
And anecdotally, I just hear it all the time. I couldn't get pregnant for a year. I was so stressed out. I was under eating. I started eating again. I started to practice stress management. I got pregnant. I mean, these are, stories that you hear quite often, because it's like the body wants to feel safe. The body wants to feel nourished. It wants to feel like, we're okay to grow a baby in this environment. And I also appreciated too, so many people were commenting saying, well, I've been practicing this and it's worked wonders for me and I've never felt better. And you kind of came in and you're like, good, that's great for you. But I think it's so important. I think that this information is getting out there, that you are sharing it, because there are a lot of people who are doing it who are feeling worse. And they're like, I'm practicing what everybody is saying is the right thing to do. And I feel like shit. And I don't know what's wrong with me. So it's good that somebody's going out there saying, hey, actually, this might not be the thing that you necessarily need as a woman right now.
Absolutely. And I am the last person to tell anyone to do with anything with their bodies, especially women. Like, I want everyone to literally do whatever they want. That's like my dream for Earth, is like that everyone will do whatever they want. Like a lawless society of happy people, I'd be very happy. I promise you. I think when people are commenting that too, first of all, we're on a podcast. It's not medical or nutrition advice. I'm going to discuss trends that I see in people, and who I'm always speaking to is the people, like you said, Kaya, who have done everything right and they're getting worse. That's my person. I might not be talking to the person who feels like really good all the time. Like, that's not going to be the person who wants to come to me. Like, the people who come to me are the people who are like hardcore, type A, tried everything, did everything, and the things didn't work for them, and they're putting it on themselves. I didn't intermittent fast hard enough. And it's like, no, you intermittent fasted too hard usually. And that's really just not the person I'm speaking to. So I'm going to speak to, I've worked with thousands of clients. Like, you see some trends over time, right? Like, you see what happens. And like you said, Kay, like you'll meet people and then you're like, oh, yeah, I spoke to this person. This is the same experience this person had. This is the same. You kind of put the pieces together after a while. It's like a big study almost, working with clients.
I want to, Michelle, kind of pivot, going back to talking a little bit about weight loss. I know, you've talked about your own journey, what the biggest lessons you've learned. What do you think people today are doing who are maybe sabotaging themselves and their weight loss journey?
I think also focusing too much on going too fast too soon. It's really hard to tell people to go away from that advice, but I really would say like slower is almost always better, because it lets your hormone levels adjust, it lets your nervous system adjust as you're going along. But sometimes people need like more black and white recommendations, and sometimes that helps them. You have to find what tools work for you. For some people, honestly, calorie counting's supportive for them. It's like, oh, I can see what this is and it's black and white for me. I don't feel like it's always helpful for people, and I don't really use it in my practice, but there are people who it is. For some other people, maybe macro counting or whatever it is. No matter what the tool is, you just have to make sure you're okay doing it and that you feel comfortable doing it. I would say a lot of people are not prioritizing protein on a weight loss journey too, and that would be something that's so important. And I would also say eating regularly, like we've talked about, is usually, it just makes weight loss A, easier, and B, I think that it will help your nervous system to adjust along the way, because our body really doesn't like to feel like it's starving and that you're rapidly making a change, because again, our bodies are primed for survival. So being really mindful of protein, going nice and slow, focusing on just detox and drainage before you even start a weight loss journey moving your lymph fluid, like making sure you're getting enough, just like vibration, walking. If you want to do some dry brushing, like opening up your drainage pathways because you are going to be spilling toxins out, and then checking your nutrient levels along the way. I would be focused on all the nutrients involved in liver detoxification, any antioxidants. I would be really focused on that and just making sure you're not getting toxin overloaded as you're losing weight too.
How do you balance the weight loss versus somebody's body type conversation? Because I see a lot of women who they continuously want to keep losing like that 5 pounds or that 10 pounds. And then from an outside perspective, I'm looking at their body and I look at my body and I'm like, I'm never going to be like a busty, petite, small woman or something like that. That's just not my body. I'm leaner, I'm taller, I'm like, this is the way that I look. And then other people, their body composition is just different. The way their body type is different. How do you balance that conversation?
I would say the first thing I want people to think about is if the stress of losing weight is more than the medical necessity to lose it. One should not be higher than the other. It should be matched. The stress and the urgency of losing weight. Listen, I have clients who are 150 pounds higher than their baseline weight or the weight that they're comfortable with. For them, their knees are hurting. They're feeling pressure inside of their body to lose weight. And from a societal perspective, it really influences their lives. Like, it really makes a huge difference in their lives, regardless of how extremely body positive I am. From a morality standpoint, from a philosophical, political standpoint, people might want to lose weight for really valid medical inflammation, other reasons. It's extremely valid. When it becomes concerning, again, is when the stress of it becomes greater than that medical need for it. And that's where I would start addressing, like, where does being inside of my body feel scary? Where does it feel unsafe? Like, a lot of clients will say, I'm going on a trip soon, and you'll notice their urgency going up and up. I have to be in a bathing suit, all these things. And I think it's just really more about focusing on how to create those safety signals and how to make you feel heard to yourself. And that might be more transformational than, like you're saying, hey, just losing the 5 pounds. Like, I don't deny any person's wanting to lose 5 pounds, but we really have to understand, is it stressing you out more than it needs to? And how do we address ourselves to reduce the urgency of it, at least, so that it doesn't feel like I'm going to rip my skin off. I can't live inside this body right now.
It breaks my heart because we talk to so many women through our company, Bia, and sometimes that stressor will be maybe one of the reasons why they might not be getting their period or their hormones are out of balance. So it like breaks my heart to hear stories like what you both are kind of mentioning, because it is more common, unfortunately. It's just wild.
Yeah, I was just going to say the hormone piece is also another huge element, I think, for women to consider. And there have been conversations online, and I saw you contribute to them too, where some people are saying the idea of balancing your hormones is bogus. That's nothing.
It's laughable.
Your entire company being predicated on this like very like scientifically proven idea.
Like,
yes.
No.
The hormone balancing conversation, just like health, is a part of a wheel, right? It's not just one thing. Our hormones being balanced are the cause of multiple things. And we have one product that is just a tiny tool in that wheel. But let's talk about hormones and hormone balancing. What role does that kind of play in the work that you do? And can you talk about the debate? What is the debate here?
Oh, it's been a, by the way, I'm so scared. I'm like, what did I say, Kaya? Yasmin, what did I say online? I can get a little bit jumpy in the comments. When I get frustrated with these kind of things, with the balancing your hormones conversation. So the breakup, there's a couple break aparts right now. Western medicine, functional medicine. It seems at some point in time that, I'm assuming it's like nearing the advent of modern medicine 100 years ago, that anything now, this is very interesting and hard to explain, but I'm excited to talk about it. Anything now that is Eastern in ways of thinking, medicine-wise, philosophy, is considered diet culture. So the idea that we can put interventions in place that are based in TCM or Ayurveda is now viewed as diet culture, which is so degrading to 10,000 years of scientific information. And one of the things that has gotten caught up in that is that you can, in fact, balance your hormones without medication. Of course you can. I mean, the idea that you can alter hormone function based on food, nutrition, lifestyle interventions is the basis of all the work that we do. So, of course, we've seen it happen thousands of times. And I think the dietitians, I will tell you both this so candidly, the dietitians who are in the anti-balance your hormones, there's no such thing, have never worked with clients to balance their hormones. They don't believe it's real. They think it's a fairy tale. And I'm like, look at 2 Dutch tests, one at the beginning of the work you do and one at the end. You'll see that you can balance your hormones in whatever way. Hormones are also kind of the last stop on the train when it comes to, you make a lot of the foundational changes, and hormones are really a downstream effect after like the whole nervous system is taken into place, all of your organ function, all of your neurotransmitters, then there's like hormone changes ultimately. I think that it's really, if it comes down to it, it's a belief issue, and we are so wrapped up in Western ideologies that medications are the only, trust me, like Pfizer's out here, like, yeah, that people are doing this. They're like, there's nothing you can do besides getting this medication. There's nothing you can do. That I've seen, and this is honestly too, I've seen a swing in the past few years. I don't know if it is because of, and I don't know if it's too controversial, you can cut it out, but I don't know if it's because of what's happened in the past 4 years, but there's definitely been a bigger push against functional medicine than I've ever seen in the past 10 years. And I think that it's led people to start categorizing everything as snake oil or any Eastern modality, which is just degrading the culture of billions of people, which is fine.
I know. And why can't we all meet in the middle? Like, we are all sitting here saying, hey, there's a place and a time for conventional medicine. There's a place
We
for...
love it.
Yeah, we love it.
Life-saving.
We need medications at times, we need surgery at times, and it's just a little bit funny. Like you said, you can see the direct reflection in somebody's blood work, their cortisol, their insulin. All these hormones can be impacted by what people are eating, what they're doing. So it's just kind of silly to me that people are having this debate. But
the bigger question for all of us is, what are you doing as a dietitian if you are not helping clients to foundationally change those labs, their health, their symptoms? If you truly don't believe that nutrition plays a role in any of this, what are you doing with clients in your sessions? It's always the question I have. And I think it's the same thing where I am a huge fan of intuitive eating and the body positivity movement. But as a clinical framework, then my question is, again, like, if you're just focused on intuitive eating and someone's relationship with food, do you have the tools to help them with the other things that are going on in their cycle? Like intuitive eating, if someone has endometriosis, is going to help with 1% of the symptoms. But what about the rest of the puzzle, which is what nutrition work is supposed to be, obviously.
Right. And if somebody has gotten to that point, unfortunately, which a lot of people have, where they are so disconnected from their body that they don't have that intuition right now, they're working on building it up. They need somebody to guide them. And that's okay to have that guidance for a period of time until they can become their own best doctor. Yeah,
exactly. I think the best practitioners ever are really helping people to access their own intuition around their bodies, as opposed to giving them answers. And like when I give plans to clients, they're like, oh, this is a 10-page document. You haven't mentioned food once. And I'm like, I tricked you. You know, you're getting food later on, because it's really focused on like, how do we frame our healing journeys in a way that it's client-centered, in a way that they are in the driver's seat, because I can't own their healing. Like you're saying, we have to own our own healing. And if I frame my plans like this elimination diet is going to save your life, it wouldn't be true to the work of functional nutrition, which is that the client is the whole story. They're the most fascinating part of the experience. They have all the answers. It is only our job to pull out of them what they have.
That's so beautiful. And I love that approach. And I'm just curious, you mentioned you create these plans for them, and food is the last thing that's kind of on the list that you work with them with. So what are some of these foundational items, just so somebody who's listening in can kind of reflect on these other alternatives and things they might not have thought about?
Absolutely. Yeah. So in my like original like part 1 battle plan, they're going to get, basically I'm going to lay out the goals for them, and then I'm going to tell them like exactly how we're going to achieve that. So I never just say, we're going to help your nervous system. I'm going to say, I want you to do this at this exact time based on their current schedule. So it could be lifestyle, it could be supplement, it could be breath work, it could be gentle little movements. If someone has heart rate stuff going on where they have low or high swinging heart rates, it might be wearing compression socks. It could be doing really any tool. It could be visualizations. It could be, let's talk to the different voices in our head. I mean, there's no 2 client plans of mine that look the same, but no matter what, I always, in any of my client plans, and I have 4 other amazing staff nutritionists too, we just put everything in a schedule, because the last thing someone who's sick and needs help with is like more stuff to think about. I'm like, here, let me be your secretary on top of everything else. If I tell you to take a supplement, I tell you how and exactly when to take it, not just like take it. And it's really focused on like getting natural sunlight. You had Dr. Alexis Cowan on the podcast recently, who definitely, I know she was talking about that on the podcast, of course.
Oh, yeah.
And focused on like, how do we align ourselves with our body's natural rhythms, and everyone's is different, and how do we start to trust and build trust within our body. And one of the best ways we do that is just building some level of habit and promising our body, like, I'm coming for you, I'm listening to you, I am so here with you, let me show you how much I care by drinking this silly little lemon water in the morning. Let me do these acts of service towards our body, and then your body starts to play ball with you a little bit. So it's this really weird thing that I discovered throughout working with people, but it's that like once you build that contract and commitment with your body, then your body starts to play with you. But it's hard when you don't feel safe and you want to try things. Trust me, people come to me and they want me to give them like a crazy supplemental food protocol, and I'm like, soon, don't worry. But then we ease our way in a very, very gentle way.
Oh, that's amazing. I love the investigative approach that you and your team take. And I imagine that people are going to listen to this and they're going to be like, how can I work with you guys? So are you taking more clients on, or how do people kind of work with you?
3 of us are booked out. I have 2 amazing staff dietitians who are available, who are newer. That's the only reason they're available, but they are so freaking amazing. Jess and Sarah. Currently, this is just like in like the highest transparency. I will take clients who are dealing with these highly sensitive bodies, who have MCAS, POTS, and hypermobility, and who quite literally cannot find answers anywhere else. I always save spots for them, but all my dietitians are trained in helping them as well. I also just opened up this, it'll be open on May 6th, so whenever this comes out, the Highly Sensitive Body Hub, which is basically an information center for people who, again, feel like conventional medicine has failed me, functional medicine has failed me, I felt worse doing all of this, my body's acting differently than other people's, where do I get information? When I went through my worst healing crisis, I could not find information for myself anywhere online. I was writing like into Reddit, like, why do I feel worse on day 9 of my period? You're not getting any answers on Reddit from that. So I basically made a directory for that information for people where they actually can find it to understand their own bodies. It's really just that information center. And then also I have other like little group programs if people ever want, and they can just listen to me for free on Quiet the Diet, the podcast also.
I want to end the conversation just talking about 2 specific macros. We didn't get to talk about too much. We talked a little bit about protein, but I want to talk about carbs. I want to talk about protein. Let's talk about carbs first, and extremely low carb diets, which I think a lot of people in this day and age have a lot of experience with. What is the challenge with low carb diets for menstruating women?
I would say that I have the same concerns as intermittent fasting for menstruating women, which is that low carb diets, first of all, low carb diets are going to create a drastic need for higher cortisol. So that's where people might get into that space of having more anxiety, having more hormonal issues down the line, losing their periods ultimately. We also desperately need carbohydrates for conversion of our thyroid hormones. So because of that, very low carb diets are a huge concern for me. And let me give you some numbers, because people love the numbers. So if you're eating less than 20 grams of carbs per day, it's considered a very low carbohydrate diet. If you're eating less than 130 grams of carbs per day, that's considered a low carb diet. And I think a lot of women think of low carb diets as being like basically no carbs. What it means by a low carb diet is that if you're eating less than 130 grams of carbohydrates per day, your body is going to possibly vacillate between using fat or carbs as a primary fuel source. Here's the tricky part that no one seems to nail down. The worst place you can be is eating anywhere between 20 and 130 grams of carbohydrates, because less than 20 grams, your body's going to use fat for fuel. That's ketosis, right? It's going to create ketone bodies. That's how it'll get its fuel source. If you don't have more than 130 grams of carbs per day, your body doesn't know if to use fat or carbs. So it ends up just not really having an adequate fuel source in either direction. So you actually decrease metabolic flexibility by staying in that middle low carb range between very low carb and low carb. So I just would say my general guideline is that people should have around, if you want to go on a low carb diet, 130 grams of carbs per day. If you want to go on a very low carb diet, that's ketosis. I generally wouldn't recommend that in the same way for menstruating women, although some people randomly do very well with it.
That's so fascinating. I didn't know about that little middle period, but that's really cool to hear. And what about protein? Because we talk a lot to experts about protein, specifically for muscle building and for glucose tolerance and absorption and all of that. But there's so many other benefits for protein that you talk about. Can you share some of those?
Yeah, protein is, for my people, my highly sensitive people, it's like the cement that holds our body together. Like, it is so, we so desperately need protein. Besides it being obviously a building block for skeletal muscle, for our connective tissue, which literally, if I think of protein and you think of a building structure, it's the columns, it's the cement, it's the bricks, it's every single part of the building. It's the structure that holds us together. In addition, protein is at the basis of our master antioxidant, glutathione. It is the structure for the center of antibodies, which are needed for a robust immune response, and the building blocks for our neurotransmitters, right? And our hormones and our enzymes. Like, proteins are the basis for every single biological function in our body. They help us to maintain fluid pressure within our veins. So if people have heart rate issues, I mean, it is, and we as women chronically and grotesquely undereat protein. I don't know when this happened, but protein became like a man thing where it's like, oh, men need protein, but women don't. Like, it's the most wild thing ever. But women really, really need protein for all of these things so much. And I'm very glad that the work of my bestie, also Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who I'm sure is in your guys' spirit, because I know that all of you guys are friends, of course, but Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who talks so much about the benefits of protein. And I think she's making protein so accessible for women again, that it doesn't feel like a man's thing. Because from a societal standpoint, that was the case. And also, we were so afraid of protein because of heart disease and fears of cancer and things like that, which in ways of animal protein, which I think have been largely dispelled scientifically. But of course, there will be vegans who will comment on this and don't feel that way.
Yeah, it's so interesting about protein too, especially when you were talking about how if somebody's been on a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet for a really long period of time, which is a lot of my family members who I'm trying to get them to eat more protein in their diet, they're now eating more animal protein, and they listen to Drew's work, they listen to my work, and they're like, okay, I need to start doing this, but they do not want to eat it. They don't have the taste for it. They don't have the desire for it. And you talked about something really interesting with that.
I love that you're saying that too. So I also was a long-term vegetarian, like 12 years, vegan, not vegetarian. I never was vegetarian. I haven't eaten dairy in like 20 years, but I was vegan for like 12 years. Okay. So our stomach acid is very efficient at basically knowing I'm going to produce the right amount of stomach acid for exactly what my body needs. Vegetarian diets require much less stomach acid than high meat diets. So meat, it requires more stomach acid because it's more dense in protein and fat. And the primary site of protein digestion is actually our stomach acid. So what I notice is that over time, people will have lower stomach acid levels, and then you actually can, which can create acid reflux, which is what that functional medicine theory is. Reflux will cause you to have much less of a taste for protein and for meat, because your body's like, I don't have any acid in that stomach. It's all over the place. It's in the wrong place. Basically, there's no acid here. So people stop craving meat, and that makes them believe they don't need it. I would say if I have a person who's really not craving meat and is experiencing acid reflux, and I'm interested because your mom, you said before, is experiencing acid reflux, and it sounds like she may have been a long-term vegetarian too. I have not seen really good studies on this, but it is something that I've seen in practice a lot. So I'll speak anecdotally, which is that I believe that vegetarians and vegans over time do develop more acid reflux. And then as a result, again, you don't want to introduce the meat because your body doesn't want it. So what I would tell people to do is if they feel like the fire's too high, then like the fire, I have reflux symptoms. I get a weird taste in my mouth. And this is a weird thing about reflux, is that it's not usually the symptom of like burning. Usually I see clients experiencing reflux as there's like this little elf in their stomach who's trying to break out, and he's like clawing the inside of your gut. It's this very weird feeling where you feel nauseous and overly full at the same time. So the last thing you want during that is to like pour meat into your system. So I have clients do like really tiny interventions, like putting a little baking soda and water in the morning. This is not medical or nutrition advice, just something that I've seen work, and drinking that just to cool the system before you add that ginger in and build it back up. And then you actually, if you start using bitters, you start adding ginger and adding that heat back in your digestion, I often see people starting to crave meat. And then there's also like gateway drugs to meat. Like you can try fish, you can try things like that. But I do believe that animal protein is pretty essential in the diet, to be honest with you. So finding ways to like work with that and knowing that just because you're not craving meat, it doesn't mean you don't need meat. And I just something else I want to specify about vegan diet specifically is that even the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics, which I don't always agree with, will tell you that, and they're pretty pro vegetarian and vegan diets, a well planned and supplemented vegan and vegetarian diet can get you adequate nutrients, right? But that doesn't really acknowledge protein. You have to supplement if you're on a vegan diet for you to have enough B12 and vitamin D for even brain function. You must supplement. So to me, any diet that requires supplementation is not a long-term perfect diet. I'll call it. I won't say healthy because there are, of course, healthy people in every category of diets. But for your family specifically, to the Pruitts, even though you're not craving protein, you still really might need it. And the reason you're not craving it is because you haven't had it in a long time.
I'm going to send them this personal message just for them. I feel like we could have a whole conversation on reformed veganism. But again, like you said, there's diets for everybody, whatever makes people feel good. But if anybody's out there, they are experiencing those things, this is good information to have. And I just so appreciate everything that you're bringing to the table, everything that you're educating women about. It's so amazing, and men too. Thank you so much for being here with us. And thank you for sharing all of this useful information with us.
It was like the highlight of my week. This is like maybe month. It was like the best time. Thank you so much for having me. Seriously, thank you both so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you. And I hope that we all can meet in person one day. That would be really nice.
No, we have to meet in person one day. We're not meeting in Delaware though, okay?
No,
Yasmin,
no.
we're meeting in LA.
Let's do it.